The stranger in the snow, the wind howled across the frozen colony, carrying sharp flakes of ice that cut the skin like tiny blades. The settlement was a place of survival, not comfort, and only the strong or the desperate managed to live here. Among the narrow metal shelters and broken machines walked a middle-aged man, his coat torn, his boots almost useless against the cold. His name was Daniel, once a mechanic, once a father, once a man with hope, but now only a shadow moving through the storm. Daniel pressed his hand into his pocket and felt the weight of a single credit chip. It was the last one he owned, the last piece of money that could buy him food or warmth. He had nothing else, no family, no fortune, no future. The colony had taken everything from him, but still he walked. Because walking meant he was not yet frozen, not yet gone. Then he saw her, at first. Daniel thought it was just another broken figure lying in the snow, another lost soul claimed by the storm. But as he drew closer, he saw pale skin glowing faintly under the frost, and hair that shimmered with strange silver light. It was a girl, not human, not from this world. Her chest rose weakly, shallow breaths escaping her lips, her body trembling as if the cold wanted to steal her last breath. Daniel stopped, his heart pounding. He looked around the empty street. No one else was there. The colony did not care for the weak, especially not for aliens. Most people would step over her body, let the storm finish its work, and keep walking. That was survival here. But something in Daniel's chest refused to move. He knelt beside her, his hands shaking from both cold and fear. Her skin was like ice, her pulse so faint it almost vanished beneath his fingers. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, strange violet eyes filled with silent pleading. She could not speak, but Daniel understood. She was asking for life, asking for help, asking for a chance. Daniel pulled out the credit chip from his pocket and stared at it. That single chip could buy him a heat capsule for himself, a little food, maybe one more day of survival. If he used it on her, he might not live long enough to see tomorrow. The storm roared louder, as if demanding his choice. He closed his eyes, whispering to himself, "It's only one life, one small life." But when he opened them again, he saw her shivering, her breath weaker with every second. Something inside him cracked, the same part of him that once held his daughter, the same part of him that refused to let innocence die. He pressed the chip into the vending slot on the wall. The machine groaned and hissed, releasing a single warmth capsule. Daniel caught it in his hands and rushed back to the girl. He activated the capsule and placed it against her chest, light glowing as the device spread heat through her frozen body. Slowly, her breathing steadied. Color returned to her skin, and her trembling eased. Daniel wrapped his coat around her and whispered, "Stay with me, please. Stay alive." The girl's eyes opened again, meeting his. And for the first time he saw not just fear, but also trust. A silent bond formed in that freezing street. One human and one alien, two souls refusing to give up. Daniel lifted her in his arms, her body fragile, lighter than he expected. He carried her through the storm toward his shelter, his legs heavy, his lungs burning with cold. Every step was pain. Every gust of wind tried to push him back. But he did not stop. The last credit was gone. His future was empty, but at that moment none of it mattered. He had chosen life. He had chosen her inside the shelter. Daniel placed her on the thin bed and wrapped blankets around her. The heater barely worked, but the capsule's warmth still glowed faintly. Keeping her alive, he sat beside her, staring at her strange face, wondering who she was, where she came from, and why fate had put her in his path. The colony outside remained cruel and silent, but inside his small shelter, there was a spark of something new. Not hope, not yet, but something close, something fragile. As Daniel leaned back, exhaustion pulling him toward sleep, the girl moved slightly. Her hand, weak and trembling, reached for his. Her fingers closed around his own. Cold but holding on, Daniel froze, staring at her in silence. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her grip said everything. She was alive. And she was choosing him. The storm raged on outside. But inside that broken shelter, a story had begun. A story of a man who gave his last credit, not for himself, but for someone no one else would save. And in that choice, his life was about to change forever. The silent guest Daniel woke to the sound of the heater struggling against the storm, its weak hum filling the small shelter. His body ached from carrying the alien girl through the snow, but his eyes quickly moved to her. She was still lying on the bed, wrapped in his worn blanket. Her skin no longer pale blue but closer to a soft silver glow. Her breathing was steady now, and her chest rose and fell like a fragile rhythm of life. For a moment, Daniel simply stared, wondering if last night had been real. He had spent his final credit on a stranger, on someone who wasn't even human. The memory burned in his mind, his last chance of survival, given away in a single act of mercy. And yet, as he looked at her, he did not feel regret. Instead, he felt a strange calmness, almost as if saving her had saved a hidden piece of himself. The girl stirred, her eyelids fluttering open, and her violet eyes met his. They were clearer now, less filled with fear, more filled with quiet confusion. She tried to speak, her lips moving softly, but no words came out that Daniel could understand. Her voice was musical yet broken, like the wind chime of a forgotten world. Daniel raised his hand gently, signaling her not to strain. "You're safe here," he whispered, his voice rough but calm. She tilted her head, watching his face as if studying every line, every scar. Her gaze lingered on his tired eyes and graying beard, and for a moment she seemed to understand something unspoken. Slowly, she sat up, clutching the blanket around her body. Still shivering despite the warmth, Daniel offered her the cup of hot water he had boiled, the only thing left in his small pot. Her fingers brushed his as she took it, and a faint warmth spread between them that was not from the heater. But safety in the colony was always an illusion. Outside, metal drones buzzed faintly in the distance, scanning the settlement with their red lights. They hunted for illegal aliens, and the girl's silver glow would expose her like fire in the dark. Daniel's heart tightened. If they discovered her here, it would not only be her life at risk but his as well. Harboring an alien was treason, and punishment was swift exile into the endless storm. He pulled the curtain tight over the small window, blocking the faint glow of her skin. The girl watched him carefully, sensing his urgency. She placed her hand against her chest and then pointed toward the door. Shaking her head as if warning him, Daniel frowned, not understanding. But the fear in her eyes was clear. She knew she was being hunted, and she knew they were close. The day passed slowly, each hour filled with silence. Daniel tried to distract himself, fixing broken wires and tightening bolts on the heater, but his mind stayed on her. Who was she? Why was she here? Why did the galaxy want her dead? He had no answers, only questions, but one truth was certain: he could not abandon her now. The bond formed in the snow was too strong, too real. That night, the cold grew sharper, and the heater almost failed. Daniel wrapped himself in his thin coat, his breath forming mist in the air. The girl noticed his shivering, her eyes narrowing with concern. She moved closer on the bed, patting the space beside her. Daniel hesitated, his pride whispering no. But the storm outside whispered louder. Reluctantly, he sat, and before he realized it, she had wrapped the blanket around them both. Her body radiated a strange warmth, not only physical but something deeper, almost alive. Daniel froze in surprise, staring at her glowing skin. The warmth spread through him like fire, chasing away the cold from his bones. The girl leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, and whispered a single word: "Protector." The word shook him. Simple but heavy. She had chosen him, trusted him, given him a name he had not earned in years. Daniel's throat tightened, his eyes stinging with emotions he thought were long buried. He placed his hand gently over hers, whispering back, "You're safe with me." But outside, the buzzing drones grew louder, their red lights moving closer through the storm. The hunters had arrived, and Daniel's small act of kindness was about to drag him into a fight he never asked for. The silent guest in his shelter was no longer just a stranger. She was a secret that could change his life or end it. The price of kindness. Morning in the colony came without sunlight. Only the pale glow of frozen clouds and the bitter wind that never rested. Daniel rose early, his body stiff from the cold, his mind heavy with worry. The alien girl was still asleep, her silver glow faint but steady, her breathing soft. He watched her for a moment, and a question repeated in his mind. What had he done? And what was he going to do now? The drones had passed during the night, but their presence was a warning. They would return, and when they did, they would search harder. Daniel knew the colony too well. People here valued survival over compassion, and for the right price, anyone would betray a neighbor. Rumors spread faster than fire, and if word reached the wrong ears, both he and the girl would vanish into the storm. Later that day, Daniel stepped outside, pulling his coat tight against the wind. The streets were filled with tired faces, traders shouting half-hearted offers, and the constant sound of machines grinding against the ice. A neighbor, old Mrs. Core, eyed him suspiciously, her gaze sharp. "You were out late last night," she muttered. "In the storm, carrying something." Daniel forced a laugh, shaking his head. "Just scrap metal, nothing useful." But her eyes narrowed, and Daniel knew the seed of suspicion had already been planted. Back inside, he found the girl awake, sitting quietly near the heater. She turned her eyes toward him the moment he entered, as if she had been waiting. Her hands moved in strange gestures, trying to speak without words. Daniel crouched down, watching carefully, and realized she was trying to tell him something important. She pointed at herself, then at the door, then pressed her hand against her chest with urgency. Daniel frowned. "They're looking for you, aren't they?" he whispered. Her silence was answer enough, her trembling hands and worried eyes saying more than words ever could. Days passed in uneasy quiet, and Daniel felt the pressure building around him. In the marketplace, whispers followed his steps. Some said he had been hiding something. Others said they saw a strange light in his window at night. The colony was not kind to secrets, and the more people talked, the closer danger came. Daniel's stomach tightened every time he returned to his shelter, afraid he would find soldiers waiting at his door. One evening, as the wind screamed outside, the girl moved closer to him, her eyes locked on his, filled with both fear and trust. She reached for his hand again, her touch warm and steady. Daniel felt the weight of her trust pressing against the weight of his own fear. He wanted to ask her who she really was, why the hunters searched for her, but every time he opened his mouth, the words died. He was afraid of the answer, afraid that knowing would seal his fate. That night, as he drifted into restless sleep, he dreamed of his past. He saw his daughter years ago, smiling as she ran across a field of green. He saw the day he lost her, the day sickness claimed her life while he had no credits left for medicine. He woke with tears in his eyes, his chest heavy with pain that never faded. And when he looked at the alien girl curled beside the heater, he understood why he could not let her die. This was his second chance, not to replace his daughter, but to honor her memory. Kindness had cost him everything once, but this time, maybe it could give him something back. The next morning, Daniel stepped outside again, only to find a stranger waiting near his door. A tall man in dark clothing, his face hidden beneath a hood. "You've been busy," the stranger said quietly, his voice low and dangerous. Daniel froze, forcing his face to remain calm. "I don't know what you mean," the man smirked, leaning closer. "Everyone knows you're hiding something, Daniel, and when they find out, it won't be you who suffers first. It'll be her." Daniel's heart pounded, but before he could respond, the man melted back into the crowd, his warning echoing in Daniel's mind. Back inside, Daniel shut the door and pressed his back against it. Breathing hard, the girl looked at him with wide eyes. Sensing his fear, he knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders gently. "You have to stay hidden. Do you understand? No one can see you, no one can know." She nodded, her violet eyes shimmering with both trust and sorrow. Daniel realized then that protecting her would not only cost his safety, but his very life. The colony was closing in, and every whisper, every glance, every suspicion was another chain pulling tighter. Outside, The storm raged as it always did. But inside Daniel's shelter, a different storm was brewing. The price of kindness was no longer just a credit chip. It was his freedom, his safety, and maybe his life. But as the girl reached once more for his hand, her soft glow warming the shadows, Daniel knew his choice would not change. No matter the cost, he would protect her. Asterisk the warmth of trust. The night was colder than any before. A storm unlike others roaring through the colony, with sharp winds that rattled every shelter. Daniel's heater coughed and sputtered, its last sparks fading as the temperature dropped to deadly levels. He wrapped his arms around himself, shivering as the cold gnawed through his coat and bones. His breath turned to ice in the air, and his hands grew numb. Across the room, the alien girl sat curled beneath the blanket, her silver glow dim but steady. Her violet eyes watched Daniel with quiet concern, every shiver of his body mirrored in the sadness of her gaze. She stood slowly, weak but determined, and walked toward him, her bare feet silent on the metal floor. Daniel lifted his head, surprised, his teeth chattering. "Stay under the blanket. It's warmer there," he muttered, but the girl shook her head, her expression calm yet firm, without a word. She lowered herself beside him, pulling the blanket around both of them. Daniel stiffened in shock, but then he felt it, the warmth. It spread from her body like a living flame, chasing away the cold in waves. His frozen skin began to thaw, and his trembling slowed. He looked at her, stunned. What are you?" he whispered. She only placed her hand gently on his chest and whispered again that single word. "Protector." Daniel's throat tightened, emotion surging inside him. For years he had been alone, haunted by loss, stripped of everything he once cared for. Now this alien girl, fragile yet powerful, trusted him more than anyone ever had. Her warmth was not just heat, it was life, something beyond human science. He realized she was giving him more than comfort, she was giving him strength. The storm outside raged, shaking the walls. But inside the small shelter, there was stillness. For the first time in years, Daniel felt peace, even as danger pressed closer beyond the door. He closed his eyes, leaning into the warmth, allowing himself a moment of rest he had not known in years. But deep in his mind, questions stirred. What was she hiding? And why had fate brought her here? The girl, sensing his doubts, lifted her hand and touched his temple lightly. In an instant, images flickered through his mind. Not words but visions. He saw great ships burning in the dark, alien soldiers hunting her kind, and a symbol carved in light that pulsed like a heartbeat. He saw her running, chased, hunted, alone. Then the vision ended, leaving Daniel breathless. He gasped, staring at her. "They want you," he whispered. "You're important." She lowered her eyes, silent, but the truth was clear. The silence of the shelter grew heavy, broken only by the storm's howl. Daniel knew then that his choice had sealed his fate. Protecting her was not only dangerous, it was impossible. The galaxy itself seemed to want her gone. Yet when he looked at her trembling form, clutching the blanket, he felt no regret. He tightened his arm around her shoulders, whispering, "We'll survive this." Together, the hours passed, the storm refusing to end. Daniel drifted in and out of uneasy sleep, warmed by her glow. But near dawn, a sharp metallic hum cut through the howling winds. He sat up instantly, his heart racing, pulling her close. Red lights flashed outside his window, sweeping across the street like the eyes of predators. The hunters had returned. Closer than ever before, Daniel's breath caught, and the girl's grip on his arm tightened. She knew them, she feared them. He placed a finger against his lips, signaling silence, and crept to the window. Through the frost-covered glass, he saw two armored enforcers scanning the houses, their drones hovering in the air. One of the drones paused, its red eye turning toward Daniel's shelter. His chest tightened, every instinct screaming to run. But running would mean exposing her, and hiding was their only chance. He turned to her, whispering, "Stay quiet. No matter what happens." Her eyes glowed faintly as she nodded, her hand slipping into his. The warmth pulsed stronger through her touch, steadying his trembling heart. In that moment, Daniel understood. This was no longer about survival. It was about trust. About a bond forged in snow and silence. And even if the hunters tore down his door, he would not let go of her hand. The red light lingered at his window for a long moment before drifting away. Daniel let out a shaky breath, relief flooding his chest. But he knew it was only the beginning. The hunters would return. Stronger and closer. Time was running out. And soon he would have to choose stay and fight, or flee into the storm. The girl leaned against him once more, her warmth wrapping around him like a shield. Her voice was soft, almost broken, but the words she whispered carried power. Together, Daniel closed his eyes, clutching her hand. For the first time in years, he did not feel like a man waiting to die. He felt like a protector, and perhaps something more. The hunters arrived. The colony woke to the sound of heavy boots on frozen ground. Daniel opened his eyes and felt his stomach twist as he heard the metallic echo of soldiers marching through the streets. He knew immediately that the hunters were no longer searching quietly. They had come openly with force. He rose from the bed, careful not to wake the alien girl. She slept lightly, her silver glow faint. Her body curled against the blanket, as if trying to stay hidden even in dreams. Daniel looked at her for a moment, then moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see. Armored enforcers stood at every corner, rifles strapped across their shoulders, drones hovering like vultures above them. The colony had become a trap. A voice boomed through loudspeakers, cold and sharp. "Attention, citizens. An unauthorized being has entered this settlement. Harboring such a creature is a crime against the colony. Turn them in at once, and you will be rewarded. Failure to comply will result in punishment." The words cut through the air. Chilling more than the storm, Daniel felt his chest tighten. The entire colony now knew, and someone would talk. It was only a matter of time. He turned back to the girl, her violet eyes now open, wide with fear. She had heard everything, understood everything. Her lips trembled as she whispered something in her broken language. Clutching the edge of his coat, Daniel knelt beside her, pressing a hand to her shoulder. "I won't let them take you," he whispered. The fear in her eyes eased slightly, replaced with a flicker of trust, but Daniel's mind raced. He had no credits, no weapons, no allies. The colony was against him. The hunters were trained killers, and the storm outside was as deadly as any soldier. Still, one thought repeated in his head: he could not give her up. Not after all he had sacrificed. By midday, the soldiers began their search, moving door to door. Daniel could hear them pounding on metal walls, demanding entry. He pulled the girl into the darkest corner of the shelter, wrapping her in blankets to hide her glow. Her hands shook, but she pressed her forehead against his arm, whispering again that word, "Protector." Daniel's heart ached, but the word gave him strength. Suddenly, heavy fists struck his door. "Open up," a soldier shouted, his voice muffled but firm. Daniel froze, every muscle in his body tense. The girl's grip on his sleeve tightened, her violet eyes wide with terror. The pounding grew louder. "Open, or we break it down." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. If they entered, it would all be over. Then, as if by fate, a distant explosion shook the colony. Screams rose outside as smoke billowed into the sky. The soldiers cursed and ran toward the noise, their footsteps fading into the storm. Daniel slumped against the wall, gasping for breath. It was only a distraction, only a delay, but it had saved them for now. That night, Daniel could not sleep. He sat beside the girl, watching her as she slept in silence. Questions burned inside him. Who were these hunters really? Why did they want her so badly, and why did she choose him? A broken man with nothing left. Near dawn, the girl stirred and sat up, her eyes glowing faintly. She touched his hand and whispered something new, her voice trembling but clear enough to understand. "They want bloodline." Daniel stared at her, the meaning sinking deep. She was not just an alien refugee. She was something far more. Her lineage carried power, maybe even royalty, maybe something sacred. And the hunters would never stop until they had her. Daniel pressed his forehead into his palms, trying to think. He was just one man. Middle-aged, worn out, forgotten by the colony. But now he was standing against forces larger than he could imagine. He looked at her again, small and fragile, but glowing with life and trust. In that moment, he knew he was no longer just surviving for himself. He was fighting for her, outside. The loudspeakers roared again. "This is your final warning. Anyone hiding the creature will face immediate execution. Report them now." The voice echoed through every street, every wall, every mind. Daniel clenched his fists, his breath sharp. The net was closing. The girl reached for his hand once more, her warmth flowing into him like fire. Her eyes locked on his, steady and strong despite her fear. "Together," she whispered, her voice fragile but full of promise. Daniel nodded, his resolve hardening. The hunters had arrived, but he would not give her up, even if it cost him everything. Asterisk, the choice of sacrifice. The colony was no longer quiet. Every corner carried the weight of fear, and every eye seemed sharper, searching for secrets. Daniel knew they were running out of time. The hunters were not leaving, not until they had her inside the small shelter. The girl sat close to him, her silver glow faint in the darkness. She had not spoken much, but her presence was louder than any words. Every glance she gave him, every time she held his hand, reminded Daniel of the trust she had placed in him. But trust would not stop soldiers, and kindness would not protect them from execution. That night, Daniel spread a map of the colony across the table, his rough fingers tracing the faded lines. There were tunnels beneath the old factories, passageways built long ago before the colony became a prison. They were dangerous, unstable, but they might be the only path to freedom. He looked at the girl and whispered, "We can escape through here. It's risky, but it's our only chance." She tilted her head, her violet eyes shining. Then she reached forward and touched his chest with trembling hands. A warmth spread through him, stronger than before. His aching joints, his weary muscles, the pain that lived in his body for years, all of it began to fade. Daniel gasped, staring at her in disbelief. You're healing me," he whispered. Her lips trembled, and she spoke softly, broken words forming with effort. "Stay. With me, I make you strong." The meaning cut through him like a blade. She could give him life, restore what time and hardship had stolen. But in return, he would have to stay. If he accepted her gift, he would not escape. He would face the hunters with her at his side. The choice was clear: run, and maybe save her, or stay and risk death together. Daniel closed his eyes, memories flooding him. He saw his daughter's face again, the day she begged for medicine he could not afford. He saw the look in her eyes when she realized he could not save her. And now here was another fragile life in his hands, looking at him the same way. His throat tightened. "Why me?" he whispered, almost breaking. "Why did you choose me?" The girl pressed her forehead against his chest, whispering again that single word. "Protector." It was not an answer, yet it was all the answer he needed. She did not see him as a failure. She saw him as the one who would stand, even when the world had already decided he was broken. The next morning, the hunters moved closer, their search turning into a siege. Drones circled above the shelters, scanning for energy signatures. Daniel knew they would find the silver glow eventually. No matter how carefully he hid her, he packed what little he had: an old torch, scraps of food, a broken knife, hardly weapons. But better than nothing. The girl watched him quietly, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. She touched his arm again, and her warmth flowed into him, steadying his trembling hands. The weakness of his age was gone, replaced by strength he had not felt in decades. But Daniel's heart was torn. The tunnels offered a chance, however small, yet her power, her gift, meant she could keep him alive if he stayed. If he fled, maybe she would survive. But if he stayed, maybe they could fight. The choice burned inside him, tearing at his soul. That night, as the storm howled, Daniel sat beside her in silence. The shelter shook with the sound of hunters passing nearby, their boots heavy, their voices harsh. He looked at her glowing face in the dim light, and he finally spoke. "If I run, I betray you. If I stay, I may doom us both." he whispered. Her small hand found his again. Warm and steady, her violet eyes met his. And for the first time, she spoke clearly. Her voice fragile but firm. Together or nothing. The words struck like lightning. There was no bargain, no half choice. She had chosen. And now it was his turn. Daniel exhaled slowly, his heart steadying. If death came, so be it, but it would not find her alone. He would stand beside her, protect her to the end, and outside. As if answering his decision, the colony's loudspeakers roared once more. Final sweep begins at dawn. No one will escape. The storm screamed over the metal rooftops. The hunters were closing in, and Daniel knew his choice was made. The final stand-on came with no sunlight, only the red glow of hunter drones circling above the colony. The storm had slowed, but the air was heavy with silence, the kind that came before violence. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, his rough hands gripping the old knife, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. The alien girl sat beside him, her silver glow brighter than before, her eyes unblinking, watching the door as if she already knew what would come. Outside, boots pounded against frozen ground. Soldiers moving in formation. The loudspeakers roared again, their voice final and merciless. All who harbor the creature will be executed. Step forward now, or be destroyed. No one stepped forward. But Daniel knew the colony would not protect him. Every neighbor, every passerby, had already chosen silence, hoping the hunters would tear his shelter apart and leave the rest alone. The girl turned her head toward him, her violet eyes shining with both fear and resolve. She whispered softly, "Protector," and then added another word, "Fight." Daniel's throat tightened, the word pulling him back to the man he once was, a father who once promised to protect his child, a man who had failed, but this time he would not fail. The door rattled as fists struck hard against the metal. "Open," a soldier's voice barked, sharp and final. Daniel stood, placing himself between the door and the girl. His knife was small, his strength only borrowed from her gift, but his resolve was unshakable. He turned to her, whispering, "No matter what happens, I will not let them take you." Her hand slipped into his, warmth flowing through him like fire. Together, they waited. The door burst open, metal flying apart as soldiers stormed inside. Rifles raised, red lights flashing across the room. The girl's glow erupted brighter, flooding the shelter with silver light. The soldiers staggered, shielding their eyes. Daniel lunged forward, his knife slashing, his body stronger than he had ever felt. He struck one soldier down, the blade catching light, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt alive, but there were too many. 3 more forced their way inside, rifles crackling with energy. Daniel braced himself, ready to fall when the girl screamed. Her voice was not human, it was a sound of power, a wave of energy that shook the walls. Light burst from her body, knocking soldiers back as if struck by thunder. Daniel stared in shock. The truth clear. She was far more than just a refugee. She was a force the hunters feared. The soldiers recovered quickly, shouting orders. "Contain her. Do not let her escape," they fired, beams of energy slicing through the room. Daniel shielded her with his body, feeling the heat burn against his side. But he did not fall. Her hands gripped his shoulders, her warmth surging stronger, healing him even as he bled. Her voice whispered into his ear, "Together," with her strength pouring into him. Daniel charged again, his knife flashing, his fists striking harder than steel. Every time he fell, her warmth lifted him. Every time he weakened, her power carried him forward. They fought as one, protector and alien, bound not by blood, but by choice. The soldiers faltered, fear flickering in their eyes. This was not the broken mechanic they expected. This was a man reborn in fire and trust. The drones above screeched, beams targeting the shelter. The girl raised her arms, silver light exploding outward, forming a shield that deflected the blasts. Her body shook from the effort, her glow dimming. Daniel caught her before she collapsed, his heart racing. "No, don't stop," he whispered. "We can end this." Summoning her last strength, she placed her hands over his chest once more. Her light poured into him, brighter than ever. Daniel felt his body blaze with power. Every wound sealing, every weakness erased, he roared, charging through the smoke, striking down the last soldier with a force that shook the floor. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of burning wires and the hum of damaged drones. The hunters were gone, defeated, at least for now. Daniel stood trembling, his knife dripping, his body blazing with borrowed strength. Behind him, the girl collapsed into his arms, her glow fading into a soft shimmer. He held her close, his chest heaving, whispering, "We did it, we survived." Her eyes opened weakly, her voice soft but steady. "Not survive. Live," she whispered, her lips curving into the faintest smile. Daniel felt his throat tighten, tears mixing with the smoke on his face. He had spent years only surviving, waiting for death. But now, for the first time, he felt alive. Truly alive. Outside, the colony was silent. Neighbors peering from their shelters, afraid to speak. They had seen what happened. They had seen Daniel stand against the hunters, and they had seen the alien girl who glowed like a star in the snow. Daniel looked at the sky, storm clouds still swirling. The fight was not over, the galaxy would still come for her. But whatever came next, they would face it together. Because in that frozen colony, a middle-aged man had given his last credit to save a stranger. And in return, she had given him back his life. Together, they had chosen trust, sacrifice, and something even greater. Together, they had become unstoppable.